The silence of Calvir was not truly silent. To the average human ear, the subterranean moon was dead, a hollowed-out rock drifting in the dark sector of the galaxy. But to Seren Ilyath, the silence had texture. It hummed with the low-frequency vibration of the ventilation systems recycling the same air for the millionth time. It dripped with the condensation falling from the bioluminescent stalactites that hung like inverted cathedrals from the cavern ceiling. It echoed with the heartbeat of Havenwell Infirmary, a sanctuary built inside a geode, shielded from the radiation storms and political noise of the upper universe. Seren stood in the neonatal unit, a section of the infirmary that had not seen a patient in 6 years. The lighting here was soft amber and warm, designed to mimic the gentle suns of nursery worlds, not the harsh, sterile white of the trauma wards outside. She moved with the fluid grace of her species, her boots making no sound on the composite floor. Seren was Arethi. Her skin was the color of moonlight on water, a pale, iridescent silver that shifted toward blue under the amber lights. Her eyes were large, encompassing nearly a third of her face, with multiple irises that adjusted independently to focus on the microscopic and the macroscopic simultaneously. She stopped before Incubator 4. It was a pristine machine, a capsule of glass and chrome, designed to cradle fragile life. It was empty. It was always empty. With a practiced motion, Seren withdrew a sterilization cloth from her pocket. She sprayed the already spotless glass with disinfectant and began to wipe. 200 years, she whispered to the empty room, her voice a melodic rasp that sounded like wind moving through dry reeds. 200 years of weariness and loneliness. She scrubbed a smudge that did not exist. This was her ritual. The shift ended in 20 minutes, and while the other nurses were rushing to compile charts or steal a final cup of synthetic caffeine, Seren came here. She cleaned the bed that held no child. It was a penance, perhaps, or a prayer. In the reflection of the glass, she saw her own face ageless, in the way Arethi were yet. Her posture carried the weight of 2 centuries. She remembered the warmth of the lives she had once carried, the distinct biorhythms of the children she had filtered and grown within her own body before she was exiled. Before she was branded a defective tool. She finished wiping the glass. "Sleep well," she murmured to the void inside the machine. Seren turned off the amber lights and stepped out into the main corridor, letting the door hiss shut behind her. The transition was jarring. The main corridor of Havenwell was a different world. It smelled of antiseptic ozone and the metallic tang of old blood. The ceiling here was high, opening up into the natural cavern where the infirmary modules were built around the edges of a massive still mineral lake. The water was black and glassy, reflecting the artificial lights of the medical bays. Patients drifted through the halls like ghosts. They were the refuse of the galaxy's endless skirmishes. Soldiers with phantom limb syndrome, refugees, with lungs burned by chemical weapons, diplomats whose minds had cracked under the pressure of peace talks. They came to Havenwell to heal, or to wait for death in a place that did not charge them by the hour. Seren walked close to the wall. She knew how she was perceived. To the humans, and the few other species here, she was an oddity, a biological curiosity. As she passed the recreation lounge, she felt the eyes of a recovering pilot on her. He was a human male, half his face reconstructed with synthetic skin. He nudged the man next to him. "There she goes," the pilot muttered, not bothering to lower his voice. "The Shaper. I heard on Oreth they don't even have hospitals. They just have women like her who rearrange your cells with a hug." "Don't stare," his companion hissed. "She's the head night nurse." "Alien nurse," the pilot corrected, leaning back with a sneer. He called out as she passed. "Hey, Ilyath, do you come with an instruction manual? Or do we just press buttons until something happens?" Seren stopped. She did not turn her whole body, only her head. Her multi-lensed eyes, rotating to fix him, with a gaze that was both clinical and terrifyingly empty. "If I did," Seren said, her tone as dry as the dust on the moon's surface, No one would read it anyway. She did not wait for his reaction. She continued walking, her datapad tucked under her arm. The prejudice was as much a part of the atmosphere as the oxygen mix. They feared what they did not understand. The Arethi were known as master geneticists, but their technology was biological, not mechanical. To a galaxy obsessed with steel and silicon, a woman whose body could synthesize antibodies and knit flesh was viewed with deep superstitious suspicion. They called her a healer during the day and a witch when the lights went dim. She rounded the corner toward the supply depot and nearly collided with a disaster. A metal crate, heavy with canisters of liquid bandage and adrenaline injectors, crashed to the floor a meter in front of her. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. Canisters spun across the floor, glass vials skittering dangerously close to the edge of the walkway that overlooked the mineral pool. "Damn it!" a voice swore. Seren looked down. A man was on his knees, scrambling to catch a rolling bottle of sedative before it plunged into the water. He was human, broad-shouldered, wearing the gray coveralls of the maintenance staff. His hair was a salt and pepper thatch that had not seen a barber in months, and his face was etched with the kind of deep lines that came from squinting into suns or targeting scopes. He caught the bottle just as it tipped over the edge. He let out a breath, shoulders sagging, and turned to see Seren standing over him. "I am so sorry," the man said. He scrambled to his feet, dusting off his knees. He was tall, taller than her, but he held himself with a slight hunch, as if trying to occupy less space. The handle on the crate snapped. "Cheap manufacturing. I didn't mean to wake the dead with the noise." Seren looked at the scattered supplies. Her eyes cataloged them instantly. 6 vials of morphine intact. 3 rolls of synthetic skin unspooled. 1 diagnostic wand cracked. She sighed a small expulsion of air. She crouched down, her movements fluid, and began picking up the vials. She slotted them back into the tray with perfect geometric precision, organizing them by chemical volatility. The man blinked, then hurriedly knelt to help her. His hands were large, scarred, and calloused hands that had held rifles, not wrenches, for most of their existence. "I can get it," he said, reaching for the same vial she was. Their fingers brushed. His skin was warm, rough, and radiated a high thermal output typical of stressed humans. Seren pulled back. "You are stacking them wrong. The heavy fluid goes on the bottom or the center of gravity shifts." "Right. Physics," the man muttered. He looked at her, really looked at her, and paused. He didn't have the look of fear or lust that she usually encountered. He just looked tired. "I'm Ronan. Ronan Ward. I just started in maintenance 3 days ago." "I know," Seren said, standing up. She held the now organized tray out to him. "You are the one who fixed the heating unit in Sector 7. The pipes stopped rattling for the first time in a decade." Ronan took the tray, offering a lopsided, weary smile. "Old pipes just need a little persuasion. And a lot of tape." He looked at the perfectly arranged box in his hands. "Thanks for the help. I probably looked like an idiot." "At least you dropped supplies, not organs," Seren said. Her face remained impassive, but there was a flicker of something in her tone. A joke. A very dry, very small joke. Ronan blinked, surprised, and then a genuine chuckle escaped him. It sounded rusty, like an engine turning over after a long winter. "Yeah, that would be a harder cleanup. It's hard to explain to the doctors why the kidney is dusty." Seren felt the corners of her mouth twitch upward, perhaps 2 millimeters. "Do not drop anything else, Ronan Ward. The acoustics in here amplify mistakes." She turned to leave, but the sudden blare of the klaxon froze them both. The amber lights of the corridor flashed to a harsh, pulsating red. The announcement system crackled to life. Code Orange. Incoming transport. Docking Bay 3. Viral containment protocols active. All senior medical staff to triage. Repeat. Code Orange. Seren's demeanor shifted instantly. The dry wit evaporated. Her spine straightened, her eyes dilated to take in maximum light. "Code Orange, Ronan," said the maintenance man, vanishing, and the soldier appearing in his stance. "Contagion." "Unknown, Seren," said, already moving. "Go back to your quarters, Ronan. If this is airborne, the vents will lock down." "I'm on duty," he argued, falling into step beside her, ignoring her dismissal. "If they need containment, they need the airlocks managed manually. The servos in Bay 3 are sticky." Seren didn't have time to argue. She broke into a run, her stride long and effortless, while Ronan jogged heavily beside her. They reached docking Bay 3 just as the airlock hissed open. The steam from the decompression cycle billowed out, swirling around the figures emerging from the transport. Dr. Mira Solon was already there, shouting orders to 2 junior medics. Mira was a human woman of 50, sharp-featured and perpetually exhausted, the only person in the infirmary Seren respected, without reservation. "Masks up!" Dr. Solon shouted. "We have reports of paralysis and epidermal hardening. Do not make skin contact." Seren pulled her rebreather over her face, though her species was immune to most human viruses. She moved to the front line as the stretchers were wheeled out. There were 6 patients. They were miners, rough men and women from the asteroid belt near the Theta Quadrant. But they did not look like miners anymore. A silence fell over the triage team as the first stretcher passed. The man on the gurney was not moving. He was frozen in a posture of agony, his mouth open, in a silent scream. But it was his skin that stopped the breath in Seren's throat. His arm from the shoulder down to the fingertips had turned into something resembling diamond. It was translucent crystalline, and caught the red emergency lights, refracting them into a prism of terrifying beauty. Beneath the glass-like surface, Seren could see the red fibers of his muscle and the white of his bone frozen in stasis. "What in the hells?" Ronan whispered from behind her. "Get them to Isolation 1, Dr. Solon commanded, breaking the spell. "Seren, I need a bioscan on the progression rate. Now." Seren moved to the second stretcher. It was a young girl no older than 10. Her eyes were wide with terror, darting frantically, because she could not turn her head. The crystallization had crept up her neck, turning her throat into a pillar of living quartz. "It's okay," Seren said, her voice dropping into the hypnotic register Orethi used for soothing startled offspring. "I am here. We are going to help you." Seren reached out. She knew the protocol was no skin contact, but her gloves were hindering the delicate sensors of her diagnostic wand. She needed to know what this was. Instinct override logic. She stripped the glove from her left hand, her dominant hand, the hand of a bearer. She placed her silver-blue fingers gently on the girl's forehead, just above the creeping crystal line. The moment flesh met flesh, Seren gasped. It was not a temperature she felt. It was a sound, a vibration. Most human sickness felt like sludge, hot, sticky, chaotic. Bacteria were noisy. Viruses were sharp and buzzing. But this was a symphony. It felt sharp, geometric, and impossibly cold. It resonated through her fingertips, shooting up her arm like an electric shock, but with a distinct rhythmic pattern. Click, hum shift. It was structural. It was trying to organize the girl's chaotic organic cells into a perfect lattice grid. "Seren!" Dr. Solon barked. "Glove." Seren jerked her hand back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled her hand against her chest, the sensation of the glass rhythm still echoing in her nerves. "It is not a virus," Seren said, her voice trembling slightly. "It is constructing. It is trying to build something." "It is killing them," Dr. Solon snapped, checking the girl's vitals on a monitor. "My heart rate is dropping. The tissue hardening is compressing the jugular. Move her now." The team surged forward, wheeling the patients toward the isolation units. Ronan stepped in to help push the heavy gurney of the first miner, his face grim, his eyes locked on the horrifying beauty of the crystal arm. Seren stood frozen for a second in the docking bay, staring at her own hand. The silver skin looked normal, But beneath the surface, she could still feel the phantom echo of that sharp, crystalline song. It felt terrifyingly familiar. Not the glass itself, but the intent. The biological directive to take raw material and shape it into a new form. It felt like what she used to do. 2 hours later, the infirmary was in a state of controlled panic. They were calling it glass fever. The miners had been digging in a hollow asteroid that turned out to be a dormant incubation pod for something ancient. They had breached a spore pocket and now they were turning into statues. Seren stood at the scrub sink in the staff locker room. The water was scalding hot steam rising to cloud the mirror. She scrubbed her hands until the silver skin turned a dull gray from the friction. She looked at her reflection. The water dripped from her chin. Bearer. The word echoed in her mind. In her home world of Oreth, she had been royalty of a sort. A biological caste designed to interface with other species. Her body was a laboratory. She could take genetic material, filter out defects, reconstruct telomeres, and gestate life that was stronger, healthier, perfect. She was designed to bear the children of treaties, the offspring of alliances. But she had a flaw. She had developed a conscience. When the High Council ordered her to gestate a hybrid soldier, a creature designed only for pain and obedience, she had terminated the process. She had flushed the cells. Exile was the mercy. Execution was the standard. She looked at her hands again. The glass fever. When she touched that girl, she didn't just feel a disease. She felt a blueprint. The crystal wasn't attacking. It was confused. It was trying to write a code on a biological system that couldn't read it. It was like trying to run a hyperdrive software on a steam engine. The result was a catastrophic system crash, the hardening, the death. "I swore," she whispered to the steam. "Never again. I am a nurse. I fix what is broken. I do not make new things." She turned off the faucet with a savage twist. She dried her hands and walked out, intending to go to the observation deck to clear her head. Instead, her feet took her back to the isolation ward. The lights were dimmed to low-power mode to keep the patients calm. The viewing window into Isolation Unit 1 was large. Inside, the little girl lay on a biobed. The crystal had advanced. Her left arm and shoulder were now encased in the translucent shell. But she wasn't alone. Ronan was there. He wasn't wearing a hazmat suit, just a standard surgical mask and gloves. He was sitting in a chair beside the bed, reading from a datapad. Seren stopped in the shadows of the doorway watching. And then the giant hopped over the mountain. Ronan read, his voice low and gravelly, a stark contrast to the sterile room. But he forgot his left shoe, so every time it rained his big toe got wet. The girl couldn't turn her head, but her eyes were fixed on him. She wasn't crying anymore. "My dad used to read that," the girl whispered. Her voice was tinny, the crystal pressing on her vocal cords. "It's a classic," Ronan said softly. He reached out and very carefully took her hand. Not the human hand. The crystal hand. Seren stopped breathing. Most people recoiled from the infected. Even the doctors touched them, only with instruments if they could avoid it. The glass fever was terrifying because it erased the human form. But Ronan held the girl's glass fingers in his large, calloused palm. He didn't flinch at the coldness. He rubbed his thumb gently over the rigid, transparent knuckles, as if trying to warm them up. "It's just rock, kid," Ronan said. "I've broken plenty of rocks in my time. We'll figure this out." Seren adjusted her vision, shifting into the spectrum she tried so hard to suppress the bioethereal sight of a bearer. The room shifted into hues of energy. The girl was a fading ember of red warmth, rapidly being encased in jagged blue-white spikes of the crystal structure. The glass fever was loud here, a screeching discord of geometry. Then, Seren looked at Ronan's hand. Where his skin touched the crystal, the blue-white spikes didn't attack. They didn't retreat. They curved. She saw a pulse of the crystal energy, a sharp, glittering note travel from the girl's hand into Ronan's. It moved up his wrist under his skin. It didn't turn him to glass. It simply settled there. It marked him. It recognized him. The biorhythm of the glass found a harmony in Ronan's genetic structure that it hadn't found in the girl. It was a terrifying realization. The glass was looking for a host, and it had just tasted one it liked. Ronan looked up, sensing eyes on him. He saw Seren in the doorway. He smiled, tired and sad, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "She fell asleep," he mouthed. Seren couldn't smile back. She stared at his hand where the invisible seed of the glass now lived dormant and waiting. "You should not be in there without a suit," Seren said, her voice tight. Ronan shrugged gently, releasing the girl's hand and standing up. He walked to the door, the airlock cycling him out. "She was scared, Seren. The suit makes me look like a monster. She's seen enough monsters today." He stepped out into the hall, pulling off his mask. He looked exhausted, older than his years. "Besides, I'm tough. Tainted meat. Nothing wants to eat me." Seren looked at him. She looked at the man who had lost his family, who fixed pipes to forget, who held the hands of dying children because he couldn't save his own. She felt a strange sensation in her chest beneath her ribs. It wasn't the glass fever. It was the ache of a 200-year-old heart waking up to fear. "Go wash your hands, Ronan," she said, her voice softer than intended. "Scrub them twice." "Yes, ma'am." He mocked a salute, but his eyes remained gentle. "Good night, Seren." He walked away down the dark corridor, the heavy toolbox swinging by his side. Seren watched him go. She looked down at her own hands, the hands of a shaper, and then back at the retreating figure of the veteran. The silence of the infirmary returned, but the texture had changed. It was no longer just weary. It was tense. The song of the glass was humming in the air, and for the first time in a century, Seren Ilyath was terrified of what the morning would bring. The quarantine sector of Havenwell Infirmary operated on a different frequency than the rest of the station. In the main wards, the air hummed with the predictable rhythm of respirators and the soft chime of monitors. Here in the newly designated glass ward, the silence was brittle. It felt as if the air itself was waiting to shatter. Seren Ilyath moved through the isolation unit with the efficiency of a machine, though her thoughts were anything but mechanical. The number of patients had stabilized at 42, but their condition was deteriorating with a terrifying geometric precision. "Lift on 3, Seren instructed. Ronan Ward stepped up to the opposite side of the biobed. He was wearing a lighter variation of the hazmat gear mask gloves and a protective apron over his maintenance coveralls. While the orderlies and even some junior medics shied away from the statues, Ronan had volunteered for the heavy lifting. He claimed it was because the isolation unit's plumbing was finicky, but Seren knew better. He simply wasn't afraid. 1, 2, 3, Ronan counted. Together, they shifted the patient a heavy-set driller named Kale, so Seren could change the sheets beneath him. Kale's legs were entirely encased in the translucent, blue-white crystal. It wasn't just a coating. The diagnostic scans showed the crystal structure weaving through his tibia and fibula, replacing calcium with silicate lattice. "Heavy," Ronan grunted, settling the patient back down gently. "You think the crystal adds weight?" "Density," Seren corrected, smoothing the sheet with a snap of her wrist. "The atomic structure is tighter than bone. He is becoming a geode Ronan." Ronan wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Well, he's a geode that needs to be turned every 2 hours. You'd think with all this futuristic tech, someone would invent a bed that shakes you like a martini so we don't have to do it manually." "We have those beds," Seren said, checking the patient's IV drip. "They are in the luxury wing on Mars. Here you get manual rotation and my delightful company." "Lucky me," Ronan said. He walked over to the hydration station and poured himself a cup of the infirmary's standard herbal tea. He took a sip and grimaced, looking at the cup with deep suspicion. "Seren, be honest. Is this tea or Is this the runoff from the radiator cleaning cycle? Seren didn't look up from her chart. It is a blend of nutrient-rich algae and mild sedatives. It tastes terrible by design. Why? Medical tactics, she said, finally glancing at him. Her multi-lensed eyes caught the way the harsh isolation lights deepened the lines around his mouth. If it tasted good, patients would drink too much, and then they would need to use the lavatory more often. In their condition, movement is agony. Bad tea is a kindness. Ronan stared at her, then looked back at the cup. That is diabolically practical. Remind me never to ask you for a drink recommendation. Noted, she said. Now check the atmospheric scrubbers in room 4. The humidity is rising. On it, boss. As he walked away, his toolbox clanking against his thigh, Seren watched him for a fraction of a second too long. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace. He was tired, she could see the fatigue radiating from his biosignatures, but he kept moving. He was a solid object in a world that was becoming dangerously fragile. The shift ended at 4 in the morning station time. The lights in the cavern dimmed to a deep, bioluminescent purple, mimicking a twilight cycle. Seren retired to her quarters. It was a small Spartan room, carved directly into the rock. The walls were bare stone, save for a single shelf holding a small dead plant from Oreth, a reminder that some things could not survive transplantation. She sat on the edge of her bunk and activated her personal recorder. It was an antique device, a silver sphere that floated at eye level. Entry date 742, cycle, she began. Her voice shifted, losing the clipped professional tone she used in the ward. It became lower, richer, filled with the resonance of her native tongue, before switching back to standard. The glass fever is not stopping. It is learning. Today, I watched it navigate around a surgical implant in a patient's chest. It recognized the metal as foreign and built a bridge over it. It has intelligence. Rudimentary, blind, but intelligent. She paused, rubbing her temples. Her silver skin looked dull in the low light. 200 years, she whispered to the recorder. I have seen plagues that liquefy bones. I have seen parasites that rewrite memories. But this feels like a mockery. She leaned back, closing her eyes. The memories came unbidden, as they always did in the silence. She remembered the great spawning pools of Oreth, the way the light hit the water when the bearers waded in. She remembered the pride she was supposed to feel. She was a vessel, a holy chalice of biology. They called it a gift, she continued, her voice hardening. To take the seed of a diplomat and the egg of a general, to filter them through my own body, to strip away the genetic weakness, and birth a treaty made of flesh. I was not a mother. I was a 3D printer for political alliances. She opened her eyes, staring at the dead plant. And when I said no, when I refused to carry that abomination for the warlord of Sector 9, they did not just exile me. They stripped my name from the lineage halls. I am a ghost recording my thoughts for a device that will eventually run out of battery. I swore I would never open my body to another life again. I am a nurse. I stop death. I do not create life. That door is closed. End entry, she commanded softly. The sphere beeped and powered down, dropping into her palm. She held it tight, a cold, metal weight, the only confidence she had in a universe of billions. The next day, the atmosphere in Havenwell shifted from concern to dread. Seren was passing by the therapy garden, a small atrium with simulated sunlight and real soil, when she heard voices. Dr. Mira Solon was conducting a group session. Usually, Seren avoided these. The raw, unfiltered emotions of humans were loud and chaotic to her senses. But a familiar voice anchored her feet to the floor. It wasn't the big things, Ronan was saying. Seren moved closer, hiding behind a pillar of synthetic ivy. Through the leaves, she saw Ronan sitting in a circle with 4 other patients. He was staring at his hands, those large, scarred hands that she had watched handle crystal limbs with such tenderness. It wasn't the holidays or the trips, Ronan continued. It was the blocks. She had these wooden building blocks. Simple things. Red, blue, yellow. She was 3. She'd stack them up tower wobbling like crazy, and she'd look at me with this absolute intensity. Like she was building a skyscraper. He paused, swallowing hard. The air around him seemed to vibrate with grief. I'd hold my breath, Ronan said softly. I'd sit there terrified that if I breathed, the tower would fall and she'd cry. But when it finally fell, she didn't cry. She just laughed. She laughed and said, "Again, Daddy, again." That's what I miss. The again. The chance to rebuild. He looked up, his eyes dry but incredibly old. When the transport crashed, when I got the news, I didn't think about the war or the politics. I just thought about those blocks sitting in her room, waiting for a tower that wasn't going to get built. Seren pulled back into the shadows. Her chest ached with a sudden sharp resonance. She knew that feeling. She knew the weight of potential life that had been cut short of a purpose left unfulfilled. She had her empty incubator. He had his wooden blocks. They were both caretakers of ghosts. The crisis escalated 2 days later. Seren was in the lab, running a spectrographic analysis on a sample of the crystal, when the door slid open. Bram, the senior medical officer, strode in. Bram was a man who wore his authority like a heavy coat, stiff, uncomfortable, and imposing. He had served in the biowars decades ago, and his distrust of anything non-human was etched into his DNA. "Report," Bram barked, ignoring the customary greeting. "The crystallization is accelerating," Seren said, keeping her back to him as she adjusted the microscope. "It is moving from the extremities to the core. Patient 12 is showing signs of respiratory distress. The crystal is rigidifying the intercostal muscles. He cannot expand his chest to breathe." "And the cause?" Bram asked. "Unknown. It is not viral. It behaves like a parasitic tissue graft." Bram walked around the table, leaning in close. He smelled of sterile wipes and stale suspicion. "Tissue graft. Interesting choice of words, Ilyath. Isn't that your specialty, manipulating tissue, grafting one species onto another?" Seren stiffened. She turned slowly to face him. "I am a nurse, Officer Kellen. My specialty is triage." "Don't play coy," Bram sneered. He gestured to the screen, showing the jagged, beautiful growth of the crystal. "This thing, it's biological engineering. It adapts. It learns. It's too sophisticated for a random mutation. And it just so happens to appear in the one infirmary that employs an Orethi exile." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic. "Are you accusing me of manufacturing this?" Seren asked, her voice dangerously calm. "I'm saying it's a hell of a coincidence," Bram said. "People are talking, Seren. They say you Orethi play with life like it's a toy. Maybe you got bored. Maybe you wanted to see if you could make humans better by turning them into diamonds." "That is absurd," Seren snapped. "I am working double shifts to save them." "Or to cover your tracks," Bram countered. "I'm watching you, Ilyath. One slip-up, one piece of evidence that links this biofield to your physiology, and I will have you airlocked before you can blink those freakish eyes." He spun on his heel and marched out. Seren stood trembling, not with fear, but with rage. The prejudice wasn't new, but the timing was lethal. If the staff turned against her, she wouldn't be able to help the patients. And she was the only one who could hear the song. The slip-up happened that night, but not the kind Bram was looking for. Code Blue in Isolation Unit 3. A miner named Jackson had gone into cardiac arrest. The crystal had reached his heart valve. "Clear!" Dr. Solon shouted, charging the defibrillator paddles. Seren was at the head of the bed trying to insert an airway intubation tube. Jackson's jaw was stiff, the skin around his mouth turning hard and clear. "I can't get the angle," Seren shouted over the alarm. "The trachea is calcifying." "Try again," Solon yelled. "Shocking!" The body convulsed. In the violence of the spasm, Jackson's arm flailed. His hand, fully crystallized into a jagged claw of blue glass, slammed into Seren's forearm. Crack. The sound was sickening. The crystal finger shattered against her radius, sending a spray of razor-sharp shards flying. Seren gasped, recoiling. A shard, the size of a scalpel blade, had embedded itself deep into her forearm, piercing the silver skin and burying itself in the muscle. "Seren!" Solon called out, distracted. "I am fine," Seren lied, clutching her arm. "Focus on the patient." They worked for another 10 minutes, but it was futile. Jackson's heart was a stone in a cage of glass. He was gone. As the flatline tone droned on, filling the room with the sound of failure, Seren backed away. She hid her arm behind her back. She needed to get out. She needed to inspect the wound before anyone saw it. She fled to the supply closet, locking the door and jamming the mechanism. Under the harsh light of a portable lamp, she peeled back her sleeve. The shard of glass was pulsating. It wasn't just sitting in the wound. It was humming. Seren grabbed a pair of forceps. "Do not scream," she told herself. "Do not scream." She dug the forceps in, gripping the crystal. She pulled. Pain, white-hot and electric, shot up her shoulder and exploded behind her eyes. But it wasn't just pain. It was a connection. For a split second, she felt the mind of the glass fever. It was vast, confused, and desperate. It felt like a drowning child flailing for a handhold. As she ripped the shard free, dropping it into a bio-waste bin, she watched her own blood well up. It was blue, darker than human blood. And then she saw it. The edges of the wound didn't just bleed. They shimmered. Tiny, microscopic fractals of glass were left behind in her tissue. But instead of attacking her, instead of freezing her cells like they did to the humans, the glass hesitated. It melted. It dissolved into her bloodstream, and the wound began to knit together with a faint musical vibration. Seren slumped against the shelving unit, clutching her arm. She could hear it now. Not with her ears, but with her entire nervous system. A faint, dissonant song echoing inside her own body. Mother. It wasn't a word. It was a concept, a query. The glass fever had found an Arethi, and it recognized the biology of a bearer. "You know, for a nurse, you're terrible at first aid." Seren jumped, nearly knocking over a shelf of bandages. She hadn't heard the door override. Ronan stood in the doorway of the supply closet. He held a manual override key in one hand and a look of deep concern on his face. "I was just organizing," Seren stammered, pulling her sleeve down quickly. Ronan didn't buy it. He stepped inside and let the door slide shut, granting them privacy. "I saw you run out of the code blue. You were holding your arm." "It is a scratch." Ronan said, his voice dropping to that warm, gravelly tone. "Show me." It wasn't a command. It was a request. Seren hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to hide. If he saw, he would know. He would tell Bram. But looking at Ronan, the man who stacked blocks for ghosts, she felt her resolve crumble. She slowly rolled up her sleeve. The wound was already half-healed, a testament to her rapid metabolism, but the area around it was glowing with a faint, ethereal light. Veins of silver-blue luminescence radiated from the puncture site. Ronan didn't recoil. He didn't gasp. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing in focus. "It got you," he whispered. "It is trying to," Seren corrected, her voice shaking. "But it is confused. My biology is fighting it, or rather translating it." "Translating?" "It is not a disease, Ronan. I am sure of it now. It is a biological imperative. It is raw data trying to write itself onto flesh." Ronan reached out. "May I?" Seren nodded, holding her breath. Ronan's fingers brushed the glowing skin of her forearm. His hands were rough, warm, and utterly human. When he touched her, the glow intensified. The humming in Seren's blood spiked not in pain, but in a sudden surge of harmony. The dissonance smoothed out. Ronan's eyes widened. "It feels cool, like running water." "Your touch," Seren whispered, staring at where his fingers rested on her skin. It stabilizes it. Why? Ronan looked up, meeting her gaze. His face was inches from hers. In the cramped, sterile closet, the air suddenly felt very thin. Maybe because I'm not afraid of it, he said softly. Maybe it knows I'm too stubborn to turn into glass. He began to wrap the wound with a bandage, his movements gentle and precise. I'm not a Dr. Seren, but I know when something is looking for a home. That's what this feels like. It feels like something is lost. Seren watched him work. For 200 years, she had been the one administering care. To be the one receiving it, to have someone tend to her wounds with such reverence, was a sensation more intoxicating than any drug in the cabinet. Bram thinks I created this, she confessed, the words spilling out. Bram is an idiot with a diploma, Ronan said, tying off the bandage. He kept his hand on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. He sees a monster because he's looking in a mirror. I see you, Seren. You're the only one actually trying to understand this thing instead of just fighting it. He stepped back, the loss of contact, leaving Seren's skin feeling strangely cold. We have to figure this out, Ronan said, his face setting into grim determination. Before Bram decides the solution is to airlock the whole ward. I need samples, Seren said, her mind racing. Fresh ones. And I need to look at them not with a microscope but with my own senses. I need to use the bearer sight. Then do it, Ronan said. I'll stand guard. Nobody gets in. Later that night, the infirmary was quiet. Ronan stood outside the door of Lab 4, arms crossed, looking like a statue of protection. Inside, Seren sat in the dark. She had placed a sample of the active crystal taken from the deceased Jackson into a containment field. She closed her eyes and opened her mind. She dropped the mental shield she had built up over 2 centuries of exile. She reached out with her biological empathy, the sense that allowed her to communicate with developing fetuses, to knit genetic strands together. She touched the mind of the glass fever. It was blinding. It wasn't malice. It was potential. It was a massive, uncontrolled surge of evolutionary energy. It was a seed that had fallen on the wrong soil. It was trying to build a structure that could hold it, but human bodies were too soft, too carbon-based, too fragile. So it hardened them, trying to create a shell, but killed them in the process. It needs instructions, Seren realized, tears leaking from her eyes as the intensity of the connection battered her. It is a builder without a blueprint. She pulled back, gasping for air. The revelation was staggering. The glass fever wasn't a plague. It was a form of life, a silicon-based consciousness that needed a biological matrix to mature. If it could be stabilized, if it could be taught how to integrate rather than consume, it could be harmless. It could even be beneficial. But to teach it, you couldn't just talk to it. You had to show it. You had to give it a template. It needed a host that could survive the integration. A host with an adaptive fluid genetic structure. An Orethi. It needed her. But she couldn't do it alone. Her DNA was the soil, but she needed a seed. She needed a human genetic template to act as the bridge to teach the glass how to coexist with human physiology so that the patients could be cured. She needed a father for the cure. Seren looked through the glass partition of the lab. Ronan was there, checking the seal on the door, his profile illuminated by the corridor lights. She remembered the feeling of his hand on her arm. The way the glass rhythm had smoothed out, calmed down, recognized him. He was compatible. His resilience, his stubborn refusal to break his physiology that had already been marked by the glass, but not consumed, he was the key. Seren placed a hand on her abdomen. The space that had been empty for 200 years. The space she had sworn would remain a tomb. To save Havenwell, she would have to break her vow. She would have to become a bearer again. But this time, it wouldn't be a cold political order. It would be a choice, and it would be dangerous. She watched Ronan turn and glance at her through the glass. He gave her a small, reassuring thumbs up. Seren didn't return the gesture. She stared at him, her heart hammering a rhythm of terror and hope. She realized with a dawning sense of inevitability that she was about to ask this man to help her conceive a miracle or a monster. The storm was coming, and she was about to drag him right into the eye of it. The silence of the glass ward shattered at exactly 3 in the morning. It did not begin with a scream. The patients in the isolation unit had long since lost the ability to scream their vocal cords rigid with the encroaching crystal. It began with the monitors. A synchronized, discordant shriek of alarms erupted from 40 beds. Simultaneously, a mechanical wail that echoed off the cavern walls, like a death knell. Seren Ilyath was already moving before the first red light flashed. She vaulted over the nurse's station, her silver skin blurring under the emergency strobes. Vitals crashing in sectors 1 through 4. A junior medic yelled panic, pitching his voice an octave higher than normal. Oxygen saturation is dropping below 60%. The crystal is hardening over the alveolar sacs. "Get the nebulizers running," Seren commanded, sliding to a halt beside the bed of the young girl Alara. "Maximum pressure. Force the air in if you have to." She looked down at the child. The sight was a nightmare made of beautiful materials. The transparency had consumed Alara's chest. Through the skin now as clear and hard as diamonds Seren could see, the lungs struggling to expand. They were encased in a glittering lattice, a cage of glass that was slowly squeezing the life out of the girl. "It is too fast," Dr. Mira Solon shouted from across the room, her hands flying over a diagnostic console. "The rate of calcification has increased by 300% in the last 10 minutes. It is systemic failure. Their hearts are going to stop because the muscle simply cannot beat against the pressure." The facility shook. A deep, grinding groan emanated from the walls of Havenwell itself. "What was that?" the medic cried out, looking at the ceiling. "The structure," Ronan Ward's voice crackled over the internal comms, though he was standing in the doorway a moment later, breathless and covered in rock dust. "The infection isn't just in the people anymore. It's in the station. The crystal is eating into the support beams in the lower levels. It is compromising the integrity of the mountain." "Evacuation?" Dr. Solon asked, though. Her face said she already knew the answer. "Impossible," Ronan said grimly. "The main hangar doors are fused shut. The mechanism is completely crystallized. We are sealed in." Seren placed her hand on Alara's chest. She could feel the vibration, that terrible searching song of the glass fever. It was frantic now. It was screaming for a host, blindly consuming everything it touched in a desperate attempt to find a biological anchor. "We have 2 hours, Seren said, her voice cutting through the panic. "Maybe less. Before the patients suffocate and the roof comes down on top of us." "Then we make them comfortable," a nurse sobbed. "No," Seren said. She turned to face the room. Her multi-lensed eyes were burning with a terrifying resolve. "We do not mourn them yet. We fix them." 10 minutes later, the senior staff was gathered in the central command hub. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and fear. The holographic map of Havenwell in the center of the table was blinking red, showing the structural infection spreading like wildfire. "It is a biological imperative," Seren said, standing at the head of the table. She looked small against the backdrop of the disaster, but her presence filled the room. "I have analyzed the samples. I have felt them. The glass fever is not a virus designed to kill. It is a proto-consciousness, a building block without a blueprint. It enters the human body and tries to build a home, but it does not understand human biology. So it reinforces the tissue until it becomes stone." "We know what it does, Ilyath," Bram Kellen snapped. The senior medical officer was sweating, his face pale. "We need to know how to kill it." "You cannot kill it without killing the host," Seren said. "It has bonded on a cellular level. But we can teach it." "Teach it," Bram scoffed. "It is a plague, not a student." "It is energy looking for a shape," Seren insisted. "It needs a template. It needs a biological system complex enough to process its raw data and reconfigure it into a symbiotic form, a form that is flexible, not rigid. She took a deep breath. This was it, the moment she had been running for 2 centuries. My people, Seren said quietly. The Arethi. We were bioengineered to be universal interfaces. My immune system is multi-layered. It does not attack foreign DNA. It catalogs it. It reorganizes it. The room went silent. Dr. Solon looked at Seren, her eyes widening as the realization hit. Seren, Mira whispered. What are you suggesting? I can act as a filter, Seren said. If I introduce the active glass tissue into my own body, specifically into my womb, which is designed to accelerate cellular adaptation, I can incubate it. I can use my own biological code to teach the glass how to be soft, how to bend instead of break. If I can reconfigure the glass inside me, I can produce a plasma, a living vaccine, that will signal the glass in the patients to dissolve the hard shell. You want to impregnate yourself with the plague, Bram shouted, slamming his hand on the table. This is insanity. You want us to believe the solution is to let an alien play with our genetic structure inside her body. It is the only way, Seren said, her voice steady. It is dangerous, Bram yelled. We don't know what that thing will turn into inside you. You could create a supervirus. You could birth a monster that eats the rest of the station. This is just Arethi arrogance. You think you are gods of biology, but you are just exiles playing with fire. We are already burning, Bram, Seren shouted back, losing her composure for the first time. Look at the monitors. They are dying, Alara is dying. Do you have a better plan? Do you have a magic wand? Because unless you do, my womb is the only laboratory we have left. Bram opened his mouth to retort, his face twisting with ugly prejudice. She's right. The deep voice cut across the room like a physical barrier. Ronan stepped forward from the shadows near the door. He was still wearing his dirty coveralls, a heavy wrench gripping in his hand like a weapon. I've watched her, Ronan said, looking directly at Bram. I've watched her wipe the drool off dying men. I've watched her hold the hands of people who spit at her. She is the only one here who actually understands this thing. You are a mechanic, Ward, Bram sneered. Stay out of medical discussions. I am the guy keeping the airlock closed, Ronan said, stepping closer, looming over the older doctor. And I say we trust her. Because if we don't, we're all just statues waiting to happen. Bram faltered, looking around the room. He saw the nods from Mira from the junior medics. He was outnumbered by desperation. Fine, Bram spat. But there is a flaw in your little theory, Ilyath. You said you need a template. You can't just teach the glass to be Arethi, or it will still kill the humans. You need a human genetic marker to act as the instruction manual. You need a donor. Seren hesitated. This was the part she had feared. Yes, I need a sample of human DNA, a living donor who is compatible with the resonance of the glass. And who would be stupid enough to volunteer? Bram asked. The extraction process alone, while the glass is active in the room, carries a 90% risk of infection. Seren looked down at the table. She could not ask anyone, it was too much. Take mine. Seren's head snapped up. Ronan was already rolling up his sleeve. Ronan, no, Seren said, her voice cracking. You do not understand. It is not just a blood draw. The resonance will link you to the process. If I fail, the feedback could liquefy your nervous system. Ronan looked at her. His eyes were clear, devoid of the weariness that usually haunted them. You said the glass recognized me. You said I was stable. Seems like I'm the best candidate you've got. It is too dangerous, Seren pleaded. Seren, Ronan said softly, ignoring the room full of people watching them. I have spent 5 years waiting to die. I have spent 5 years wondering why I survived when they didn't. Maybe this is why. Maybe this is the job I was waiting for. He extended his arm toward Mira. Draw it, doctor. before I change my mind and ask for a lollipop." The preparation in Isolation Room 4 was performed in a hush that felt like a religious ceremony. Mira, Solon moved with rapid precision, mixing the reagent solutions. The sample of the active glass taken from Alara was suspended in a containment field. It swirled angrily, a jagged cloud of blue shards. Seren stood by the incubator unit. For 20 years, she had cleaned this machine. She had wiped the dust from the glass, imagining the life that would never be. Now, she was opening the casing. She stripped off her uniform, replacing it with a thin medical gown. She climbed onto the biobed, the sensors immediately humming to life, reading her physiology. "I have cleaned this bed for 200 years, Seren murmured, as she lay back, the cold gel of the sensors touching her skin. "I suppose it was inevitable that I would eventually have a guest, even if the guest is a planetary threat." Mira looked up from her console, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Just try to be a good hostess, Seren. Don't let the guest trash the place." Ronan was lying on a parallel gurney, a transfusion line running from his arm into the mixing chamber where Mira was synthesizing the cocktail. "Comfortable?" Seren asked him, turning her head. "I have had worse," Ronan said. He was pale. The extraction was aggressive. "The beds in boot camp were made of gravel and bad intentions. This is luxury." Mira stepped forward, holding a syringe. It was large, filled with a fluid that glowed, with a terrifying luminescence, a swirl of Ronan's red human blood, the silver synthetic fluids of the Orethi, and the bright electric blue of the glass fever. "We are ready," Mira said. Her hands were shaking just slightly. "Once I inject this, there is no stopping. The glass will seek out your reproductive system immediately. It will try to expand. You have to mentally and biologically constrain it. You have to force it to follow Ronan's genetic map." "I understand," Seren said. "If your heart rate exceeds 200, Mira warned, "I have to abort." "I will not let this kill you, Seren." "Do not abort," Seren said sharply. "No matter what happens, do not stop." Mira looked at Ronan. He nodded. "Do it," Ronan said. Mira connected the syringe to the port on Seren's abdomen. With a hiss of pneumatics, the fluid entered her body. For 10 seconds, there was nothing. Then Seren arched her back, a guttural cry, tearing from her throat that sounded like metal shearing. The pain was not physical. It was existential. It felt as if a star had ignited inside her pelvis. The glass fever didn't just enter. It invaded. It rushed through her veins, a chaotic screaming noise that drowned out her own thoughts. It was cold, jagged, and terrified. Expand, harden, protect, freeze. The commands roared in her mind. "Seren." Ronan's voice came from far away. She clamped her eyes shut, forcing her mind to dive inward. She was a bearer. She was trained for this. She visualized her own internal biology, not as flesh, but as a fortress. She built walls of silver light around the intruder. No, she projected her thoughts into the screaming storm. Not stone, flesh, not ice, water. The glass fought back. It tried to crystallize her spine. She felt her legs go numb, the familiar, terrifying stiffness seizing her muscles. "My heart rate is 180, Mira shouted. "Seren, fight it." "I can't," Seren gasped. The noise was too loud. It was the noise of 1,000 dying miners, 1,000 years of geological pressure. "Seren, look at me." A hand grabbed hers. It was warm, rough, calloused. She opened her eyes. Ronan had pulled himself off his gurney, dragging the transfusion lines with him. He was standing over her, gripping her hand so hard, her knuckles cracked. "Don't you dare go anywhere," Ronan commanded, his voice fierce. "You are not a tool. You hear me? You told me you were afraid of being used. Well, right now you are choosing. This is you. You are the boss of this. Tell it what to do." Seren looked into his eyes, eyes that had seen war and loss and still held kindness. She focused on the sensation of his hand, the human warmth, the pulse of his blood that was now mixing with hers. Seren gritted her teeth. I am the mother. She squeezed his hand back. Listen to me, she screamed silently, at the glass using the link of Ronan's DNA as a megaphone. This is what you are. You are not a rock. You are a heartbeat. She projected images into the storm. Not of geometry or structure, but of messiness. The chaotic laughter of a child. The warmth of a shared meal. The feeling of Ronan's hand. The image of the wooden blocks falling down and being built again. Soft, she commanded. Be soft. The storm inside her hesitated. Outside the room, the station screamed. We just lost support strut 4, Jay and the young medtech shouted over the comms. The ceiling in the main atrium is buckling. We have rocks coming down. Ronan looked at Seren. She was thrashing on the bed, her skin glowing with a blinding blue light, but she was still with them. Jayan, listen to me, Ronan barked into his headset, not letting go of Seren's hand. Grab the arc welders from maintenance, the industrial ones. Weld the emergency bulkhead shut. Sacrifice the atrium. We have to keep the infirmary clear. I don't know how to weld, Jayan panic screamed. You don't need to make it pretty, you just need to melt metal, Ronan yelled. Point the hot end at the door and pull the trigger. Go. The room shook violently. Dust rained down from the ventilation grates. Ronan, Seren gasped, her eyes rolling back. It is heavy. It wants to be heavy. It's not heavy, Ronan said, leaning close to her ear, his voice dropping to a soothing rumble amidst the chaos. It's light. It's just a feather. Remember, like that time you lectured me about the gravity dampeners, you talked for 20 minutes about anti-grav particles. Tell the glass about that. Seren let out a choked laugh that turned into a sob. I am bored you. You fascinated me, Ronan said. Keep talking. If you let the ceiling fall on me before you are done, I swear, Seren, I will haunt you for 200 years. I will be the most annoying ghost in the galaxy. I will rearrange your medical supplies alphabetically. Seren gripped his hand tighter. The pain was shifting. The jagged edges of the glass inside her were dulling. The screaming noise was turning into a hum. But the station wasn't holding. Warning, the automated system droned. Containment breach in Sector 9. Oxygen venting. Ronan, Mira shouted. The power grid is fluctuating. If the incubator loses power, she goes into shock. Jayan, Ronan roared into the comms. Status. I welded it, Jayan's voice came back coughing. But the wall is cracking. The crystal is growing through the steel. Brace it with the hydraulic jacks. I can't lift them alone. Ronan looked at Seren. She was at the precipice. The light under her skin was pulsing in time with her heart. She needed him here as an anchor. But if the power died, she died. Go, Seren whispered. She had seen the look in his eyes. Save the house, Ronan. I'm not leaving you, he said. You are not leaving, she managed to say, sweat silver on her brow. You are securing the perimeter. Go. I have your blood. I have your hand. She raised her hand, showing his blood smear on her palm. I am not alone. Ronan hesitated for a split second, agonizing. Then he kissed her forehead, a fierce, desperate press of lips against cold skin. I'll be right back, he promised. He grabbed his wrench and sprinted out of the room. The corridor was a war zone. The air was filled with floating dust and the shrieking sound of metal being tortured. The walls were covered in patches of blue crystal that were expanding visibly, eating the rivets. Ronan found Jayan pinned near the generator room, trying to hold up a hydraulic jack that weighed nearly 100 pounds. Move! Ronan shoved the kid aside and slammed the jack into place under the buckling beam. He pumped the handle, his muscles screaming, until the steel groaned and held. The generator, Ronan panted. The crystal is clogging the intake fans. If they overheat, the power cuts. I tried to clear it, Jayan cried. It's too hard, Ronan looked at the intake vent. It was encrusted with thick, blue glass. He didn't have a laser cutter. He had a wrench. "Right," Ronan growled. "Percussive maintenance." He swung the heavy wrench with all his strength. Clang. The crystal cracked. He swung again. Clang. Shards flew, cutting his face, but he didn't stop. He thought of his wife. He thought of his daughter. He thought of Seren lying on that bed fighting a war inside her own womb. Not this time, he thought. I won't lose this time. He smashed the crystal until the fan blade spun free, whining into high gear. The lights overhead flickered and stabilized. "Power is green," Jayan cheered. Ronan leaned against the wall, gasping for air, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. "Don't celebrate yet," his headset crackled. "Ronan." It was Mira. Her voice was quiet. "I'm here," he said, his heart stopping. "Is she—" "Get back here," Mira said. "You need to see this." Ronan ran. He ignored the burning in his lungs. He burst back into Isolation Room 4. The chaos had vanished. The room was bathed in a soft, rhythmic light. It wasn't the harsh blue of the fever. It was a gentle, pearlescent lavender. Seren lay on the bed. She was still. Her chest was rising and falling in a deep, slow rhythm. But it was her abdomen that drew his eye. The skin there was translucent, glowing from within. Through the flesh, he could see the mass of the glass tissue. But it wasn't jagged anymore. It wasn't a clump of spikes. It was a sphere. A perfect, smooth, pulsating sphere of liquid light. It moved with the elasticity of living tissue. "Vital signs are stable," Mira whispered, looking at the monitor in disbelief. "Better than stable. They are synchronized. The foreign tissue has integrated. It's dormant. I'm happy." Seren opened her eyes. They were exhausted, the multiple irises moving slowly, but they were clear. She looked at Ronan. "It stopped singing," Seren whispered. "It is sleeping." Ronan walked over and collapsed into the chair beside her. He reached out and touched her arm. The skin was warm. "You did it," he breathed. "We did it," she corrected. She winced slightly as Mira moved to the extraction port. "I am going to draw the plasma now," Mira said, her voice professional, but laced with awe. "If the theory holds, this plasma contains the recoded instruction set. It should tell the crystal in the patients to stand down." Mira filled a collection bag with a fluid that shimmered like liquid opal. "Jayan, get this to the synthesizer. We need 40 doses. Stat." Jayan appeared at the door, grabbing the bag, like it was the Holy Grail, and ran. The next hour was a blur of activity. One by one, the patients were injected with the serum. Ronan stood by Alara's bed. He watched. He didn't dare hope. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. The girl lay frozen, a statue of glass. Then a sound. Tink. A hairline fracture appeared on the crystal casing covering her arm. Then another. Kiar crack. The glass didn't shatter explosively. It began to flake away. It turned into a fine white powder that drifted down onto the sheets like snow. Underneath the skin was pink raw and terrifyingly, wonderfully soft. Alara took a deep, shuddering breath. Her chest expanded. The glass cage around her ribs turned to dust and fell away. "Daddy," she whimpered. Ronan closed his eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, the tears that fell were not hot with anger. They were cool with relief. By morning, the crisis had passed. The structural integrity of Havenwell was holding. The crystal in the walls had stopped growing and turned brittle, easily chipped away by the maintenance crews. Every patient in the ward was breathing. Seren sat on the edge of the incubator bed. Mira was running a final scan. "The host tissue, the sac, is still inside you," Mira said, frowning at the display. "I expected it to dissolve once the energy was expended, but it seems to have established a permanent vascular connection." "Is it dangerous?" Seren asked, rubbing her stomach absently. "It appears inert," Mira said. "Just a mass of biological memory. We can schedule a surgery to remove it once you've recovered." It's basically a benign cyst now. A souvenir, Seren murmured. Ronan entered the room. He had cleaned up, though a bandage was taped over his eyebrow. He held 2 cups of tea. Real tea, he announced. I stole it from Bram's private stash. Figured we earned it. He handed a cup to Mira and one to Seren. Bram is currently in his office writing a report that I assume tries to explain how he heroically supervised the operation, Ronan said, sitting down on the foot of the bed. Let him write, Seren said, taking a sip. The tea was bergamot and honey, sweet, warm, and tasting of life. We know the truth. You okay? Ronan asked, looking at her with that intense, searching gaze. I am empty, Seren said, and then paused. No, that is not the right word. I am quiet. The noise is gone. You saved them, Seren, Ronan said. You saved all of them. I merely facilitated, she deflected, looking down at her tea. Take the compliment, nurse, Ronan said gently. Seren looked up at him. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a raw vulnerability. They were alive. They had shared blood, mind, and terror. The connection between them hummed in the air louder than the ventilation fans. You stayed, she said. I told you I would. You gave me your blood. You gave me a template. I gave you a hand to hold, Ronan said. You did the heavy lifting. Seren looked down at her abdomen. She felt a strange flutter. Not the sharp pain of the glass, but something softer. A tiny, almost imperceptible ripple. Mira says we can remove the residual mass later, Seren said. Whatever you want, Ronan said. But for now, maybe just sleep. You look like you went 12 rounds with an asteroid. I feel like the asteroid won, she admitted. She lay back down. Ronan didn't leave. He pulled his chair closer, propped his feet up on the frame of the bed, and drank his stolen tea. As Seren drifted off, the silence of the room felt different. It wasn't the lonely silence of the last 2 centuries. It was a companionable silence. But deep inside, in the warm dark of her body, the benign cyst did not sleep. It pulsed. A tiny rhythmic beat. Thump, 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 thump. It was a rhythm that was neither purely Orethi nor purely human, and certainly not glass. It was something new, and it was waiting. The days following the breaking of the fever were not marked by silence, but by a sound that Seren Ilyath would remember for the rest of her long life. It was the sound of rain. It was not water falling from the sky, for there was no sky inside the hollow mountain of Calvir. It was the sound of glass falling. Across the 40 beds of the isolation ward, and indeed, throughout the corridors of Havenwell Infirmary, the crystal that had threatened to turn flesh into statues was losing its grip. As the recoded plasma circulated through the bloodstreams of the patients, the terrifying blue-white shells cracked. They did not shatter violently as they had before. Instead, they flaked away. Tiny shards, thin as parchment and glittering like frost, detached from skin and muscle. They fell onto the linoleum floors, onto the bedsheets, and onto the metal gurneys, with a delicate, continuous tinkling sound. It sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Seren walked down the center aisle of the ward. She moved slower than usual. The silver luminescence of her skin was dim, a sign of deep biological exhaustion, but her posture remained upright. She stopped at the bed of Alara, the young girl whose frozen hand Ronan had held during the worst of the night. Alara was sitting up. The thick, diamond-hard casing that had imprisoned her chest was gone. In its place was a dusting of white powder on her hospital gown. The girl was scratching her arm vigorously. It itches, Alara complained, her voice raspy, but wonderfully loud. That is a good sign, Seren said, checking the monitor. Itching means the nerve endings are waking up. It means you are feeling the air again. Ronan was there, of course. He was sweeping the glass dust from the floor around the bed, wielding a broom with the same grim determination he had used to wield a wrench. He looked up as Seren approached. We are going to need a bigger dustpan, Ronan said. He gestured to the pile of glittering debris. It is everywhere. I found crystal flakes in my soup at lunch. It gave the broth a nice crunch, but I think I will stick to croutons. Seren managed a small, tired smile. Do not eat the bio-waste, Ronan. That is a basic safety rule. I will try to restrain myself, he said. He paused, leaning on the broom handle, and looked at her. Really looked at her. The crisis mode had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, quiet intimacy between them. How are you feeling? Light, Seren said. She placed a hand unconsciously on her abdomen. And strange, but mostly light. The station itself was healing, though it bore the scars of the infection. The walls of Havenwell, once smooth stone and metal, were now a patchwork of repairs. Where the glass had eaten into the structural supports, there were now heavy welds and bolted plates. The maintenance crews, led by a surprisingly energetic Jayan, had reinforced the spinal columns of the infirmary. The scars were visible. Jagged lines of fresh alloy ran across the ceiling, like veins of silver gold. They were ugly perhaps by architectural standards, but to the people of Havenwell, they were beautiful. They were proof that the mountain had not crushed them. The social atmosphere of the infirmary had shifted as violently as the tectonic plates of a quake. For 200 years, Seren had walked these halls as a ghost, respected for her skill, yes, but feared for her nature. She was the other, the shaper, the witch who could twist biology. Now, as she walked toward the mess hall for her midday meal, the corridor did not empty. A group of miners, the very ones who had been brought in as statues, were sitting on a bench near the observation window. Their skin was pink and raw, covered in patches of healing salve, but they were alive. As Seren passed, the conversation stopped. She braced herself for the usual averted gazes. Instead, an old man named Silas stood up. He was a rough character, a deep-core driller with missing teeth and hands that looked like leather mitts. He wobbled slightly on his legs, which were still weak from the atrophy. "Nurse Ilyath," Silas said. Seren stopped. "Mr. Silas, you should be resting. Your muscle density is only at 60%. The old man ignored the medical advice. He took a step forward, and to Seren's utter shock, took her hand. His grip was shaky, but warm. "They told us," Silas said, his voice gruff. "They told us what you did, that you put that poison inside yourself to filter it for us." "It was a medical necessity," Seren said, stiffly, falling back on protocol to hide her discomfort. "It was a damn miracle," Silas corrected. He looked her in the eye. "I heard folks call you a devil before this. Well, if you are a devil, then I guess I will take a devil over an angel any day when I am sick. Thank you." He squeezed her hand and sat back down. The other miners nodded. One of them raised a hydration pouch in a silent toast. Seren stood there for a moment, unable to process the gratitude. She was used to suspicion. She was used to being the necessary evil. She was not used to being seen as a savior. She nodded once, a sharp, awkward motion, and continued to the mess hall. Inside, the noise level was high. The relief of survival had made everyone talkative. But as she entered the line to get her nutrient tray, a hush fell over the room near the entrance. Bram was standing by the synthesizer. The senior medical officer looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. His uniform was crisp, but his shoulders were slumped. He saw Seren and stiffened. The room went silent. Everyone knew the history. Everyone knew Bram had wanted to airlock the ward. Bram picked up his tray and walked over to where Seren was standing. He stopped 2 feet away. "Nurse Ilyath," Bram said. "Officer Kellen," Seren replied, keeping her face neutral. Bram took a deep breath. He looked around the room, seeing the eyes of his staff of the patience of Ronan, who was watching from a corner table. "I am writing the final incident report," Bram said, his voice loud enough to carry. "I have recommended you for a commendation of valor, and I have requested that the board review the restrictions on Arethi medical practices." Seren blinked. "That is unexpected." "I was wrong," Bram said. The words seemed to physically hurt him coming out, but He pushed them through. I was terrified, and I let my fear dictate my judgment. You were right about the glass, and you were right about us. I treated you like a contagion and you saved my station. He paused, his jaw working. I do not expect you to like me, Seren, Bram said, using her first name for the first time in 20 years. But I would like you to forgive me. I am sorry. Seren looked at this proud, stubborn human man. She saw the fear that still lingered in his eyes, not fear of her, but fear of his own obsolescence. We are all just biology, Bram, Seren said softly. Fear is just a chemical reaction. It metabolizes. We move on. Bram nodded, looking relieved and chastened. Thank you. He walked away. Seren exhaled a breath she didn't know she was holding. She took her tray and turned to find a seat. Ronan waved her over. That was painful to watch, Ronan said as she sat down. I thought he was going to swallow his own tongue. It was sufficient, Seren said, picking at her food. He is a man of structure. Admitting chaos is difficult for him. You let him off easy, Ronan observed. I have lived 2 centuries, Ronan. Holding grudges takes too much energy. I prefer to use my energy for more important things, like digesting this synthetic protein block. Ronan laughed, a warm sound that seemed to vibrate in the metal table. Fair enough. But as they ate, Seren noticed the other glances. Not everyone was like Silas or Bram. Some of the junior staff and a few of the civilians still looked at her with a mixture of awe and unease. They glanced at her flat stomach. They whispered. They knew she had taken the monster inside her, and they knew it hadn't come out yet. Gratitude was one thing. Comfort was another. To them, she was no longer a witch, but she was now a living reliquary for something they did not understand. 2 days later, Dr. Mira Solon summoned Seren to the imaging lab. Hop up, Mira said, patting the bio-bed. We need to check the residual mass. Ronan, you can wait outside if you want. I will stay, Ronan said from the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed. He had become Seren's shadow in the last 48 hours. Not intrusive, just present. Seren lay down. She felt fine. Physically, she felt stronger than she had in years. The chronic ache in her joints, a side effect of living in low gravity, was gone. Her skin had regained its iridescent sheen. Mira ran the scanner over Seren's abdomen. The holographic display flickered to life. Well, Mira said, adjusting the contrast. It is definitely still there. On the screen in the center of Seren's pelvic cavity was a glowing ovoid shape. It was about the size of a grapefruit. It wasn't jagged like the glass shards. It was smooth, pulsating with a soft, rhythmic light. It is not a tumor, Mira muttered, tapping the screen. And it is not the glass anymore. The silicate structure has been completely converted into biological tissue. It is a matrix. A matrix of what? Seren asked, craning her neck to look. Stem cells mostly, Mira said. Highly adaptive, undifferentiated cells. It is like a storage drive of biological potential. We are calling it a cradle sac, for lack of a better term. It is attached to your uterine wall, drawing a very small amount of blood flow, just enough to sustain itself. Is it hurting her? Ronan asked, his voice sharp. No, Mira said. It is benign. It has a pulse which is fascinating, but it has no brain, no organs, no consciousness. It is just a clump of potential. It is the leftover energy from the glass fever tamed and stored. Seren stared at the glowing orb on the screen. It chose a good spot, she murmured, a dry smile touching her lips. At least it is not pressing on my bladder, Mira chuckled, but her eyes were serious. Seren, we have options. We can leave it. It seems harmless. Or we can remove it surgically. It would be a simple procedure, a 10-minute laser extraction. Seren went still. Remove it. Cut it out. It was the logical choice. It was foreign tissue. It was the remnant of a plague that had almost killed them all. But as she looked at the rhythmic pulse on the screen, thump, 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 she felt a strange, illogical reluctance. Seren hesitated. I need to think about it. Mira nodded. Of course. There is no rush. It is not growing. Take your time. That evening, Ronan found her by the mineral lake. The lake was the heart of the cavern, a vast expanse of still black water that reflected the bioluminescent stalactites above. It was quiet here, away from the hum of the infirmary. Seren was sitting on a high ledge of rock, her legs dangling over the water. She was watching the ripples caused by a slow drip from the ceiling. Ronan sat down beside her. He didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, a warm, solid presence, in the damp cool of the cave. You are thinking about the surgery, Ronan said finally. I am thinking about mistakes, Seren corrected. She picked up a small pebble and tossed it into the water. It made a hollow plop. For 200 years, Seren said, her voice low, I told myself I was free. I was in exile, yes, but I was free from the council. I was free from being a vessel. I was no longer a piece of equipment to be used for breeding. She turned to look at Ronan. Her large eyes were luminous in the dark. And then the moment a crisis happened, what did I do? I turned myself into a vessel again. I opened my body and let a foreign entity in. I feel like I slid back. Like I betrayed the woman who walked away from Oreth. Ronan frowned. He picked up a pebble of his own and turned it over in his large fingers. You are looking at it wrong, he said. Am I? On Oreth, did you have a choice? Ronan asked. No. It was a command. The council decreed, and I was expected to obey. And last week, Ronan asked, did Bram order you to do it? Did Mira force you onto that bed? No, Seren admitted. Bram tried to stop me. Exactly, Ronan said. He threw his pebble. It skipped twice before sinking. You didn't submit, Seren. You decided. You looked at the problem, you looked at the tools you had, and you made a tactical choice. You set the terms. You picked the time. You even picked the partner. He glanced at her sideways. That is not being a tool, Ronan said firmly. That is being a boss. That is the definition of freedom. Freedom isn't about never doing something. It is about doing it because you want to. Seren absorbed his words. The logic was sound. It was human logic, blunt and practical, but it cut through her Orethi philosophical guilt. You picked the partner, she repeated softly. I suppose I did. I chose a stubborn mechanic with a wrench. And a high tolerance for weird biology, Ronan added. Seren leaned back on her hands, looking up at the glittering ceiling of the cave. It is strange, Ronan. I feel connected to it. The sac. I know it is just tissue. I know it is just the garbage data from the glass. But when I feel that pulse, I do not feel alone. Then don't cut it out yet, Ronan said simply. It is a risk. What if it changes? What if it wakes up? Then we deal with it, Ronan said. We. The word hung in the air. We. Seren looked at him. You are still here. The quarantine is lifted. The transport ships are running again. You could leave. You could go back to Earth. Or Mars. Somewhere with real sunlight and better tea. Ronan looked out over the black water. His expression softened. I tried that, he said. For 5 years. I went to the pleasure domes on Venus. I went to the meditation retreats on Titan. I felt nothing. I was just waiting for the clock to run out. He turned to her. When I was holding that jack against the ceiling, Ronan said quietly. When I was smashing that fan to get the air back to you, I felt alive. For the first time since the accident, I felt like I was supposed to be somewhere. I was supposed to be here, helping you. He reached out and covered her hand with his. I am not going anywhere, Seren. This damp, dark, leaky rock, it feels like home. Because you are here. Seren felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with biology. It was a terrifying feeling. Hope was dangerous. Attachment was dangerous. But looking at Ronan, this broken, beautiful man who had pulled her back from the edge, she realized she didn't want to be safe. She let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded rusty. "What?" Ronan asked, smiling slightly. 200 years, Seren said, shaking her head. 200 years of weariness and loneliness, and my finest accomplishment is becoming a walking incubator again. It was a bitter joke, a shield of cynicism she tried to hide behind. Ronan squeezed her hand. He didn't laugh. He looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your finest accomplishment," Ronan said softly, correcting her, "is that we are alive to hear you complain about it." Seren stared at him. The bitterness melted away. "You are impossible," she whispered. "I am persistent," he countered. They sat there for a long time, shoulders touching two exiles, watching the water. The question of the cradle sack remained a mystery glowing inside her, but the fear of it was gone. Whatever it was, she wasn't carrying it alone. The weeks passed. Life in Havenwell settled into a new normal. The glass fever became a chapter in the medical journals. Bram published his paper, giving full credit to Seren to everyone's surprise. The miners returned to their work, though many sent gifts of rare ores to the infirmary as thanks. Seren returned to her shifts. She still cleaned the empty incubator in the neonatal ward every night, but the ritual had changed. It was no longer a mourning. It was just cleaning. The cradle sack remained inside her. It didn't grow, but it didn't shrink. It just hummed, a quiet background note to her life. Then came the routine checkup at the 6-week mark. Seren walked into the imaging lab expecting a quick scan and a lecture from Mira about her iron levels. Mira was frowning at the console before Seren even lay down. "What is it?" Seren asked, sensing the change in the doctor's demeanor. "I was reviewing the telemetry from your sleep cycle monitor," Mira said. "There was a spike last night. Alpha waves." "Alpha waves?" Seren asked. "I was dreaming. That is normal." "Not from your brain, Seren," Mira said. She pointed to the screen. "From your abdomen." Seren froze. "Lie down," Mira commanded. "Now." Ronan was paging from maintenance. "I'm coming," he said over the comms when Mira alerted him. "Don't start without me." He arrived 2 minutes later, breathless. "What's wrong?" "Look," Mira said. She activated the scanner. The image on the screen had changed. The smooth, glowing orb of the cradle sac was no longer just a uniform mass of cells. Inside the fluid-filled sac, something had formed. It was small, perhaps the size of a human hand, but the structure was unmistakable. There was a spine. There were limbs. There was a large bulbous head. And inside the chest of the tiny figure, there was a rapid, fluttery motion. A heart. A real heart. "It differentiated," Mira whispered, her voice trembling. "The stem cells didn't just sit there. They organized. They used the genetic template we gave them." "The template," Ronan said, staring at the screen. "You mean my DNA?" Seren said, her hand flying to her mouth. "And yours. And the glass." "It is not a cyst," Mira said, looking at them with wide eyes. "Seren, it is a fetus. It has neural activity. It is dreaming." Seren stared at the screen. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She had thought she was carrying a cure. She had thought she was carrying a scar. But she was carrying a child. It was impossible. Orethi and humans were genetically incompatible. The number of chromosomes was different. The protein markers were alien to each other. But the glass fever, the great builder, the great bridge had done what nature could not. It had taken the two blueprints and fused them together, using itself as the mortar. "It is alive," Seren whispered. "It is a hybrid," Mira said, analyzing the data stream. "Tri-species. Orethi structure, human adaptability, silicate reinforcement. We have never seen anything like this." Ever. Seren looked at Ronan. He was standing frozen, staring at the ghostly image of the tiny hand on the screen. The hand that looked a little like his, and a little like hers. He didn't look scared. He looked struck by lightning. "Seren," he said, his voice cracking. "I did not know," she stammered, panic rising in her throat. "I swear, Ronan, I did not know. I thought it was just tissue. I would never have—" "Seren," he said again, louder. He reached out and touched the screen, tracing the outline of the fetus. "It is dreaming," Ronan repeated Mira's words. The room fell silent, save for the hum of the machine, and the amplified sound of the third heartbeat in the room, fast, strong, and undeniably alive. Seren looked from the screen to her stomach. The walking incubator joke died in her memory. This wasn't a job. This wasn't a medical procedure. This was a life that they had made inadvertently in the midst of death. The question of removal was suddenly obsolete. You remove a cyst. You do not remove a dream. But as the reality settled in, so did the terror. What was it? What would it become, and how could they possibly protect something so unique, so impossible in a universe that feared anything different? Mira turned off the sound, but the image remained. "We need to talk," Mira said, her voice grave. "About the future. Because everything just changed." The silence in the imaging lab was absolute. It was not the empty silence of a vacuum, nor the tense silence of a waiting room. It was the heavy, suspended silence of a universe shifting on its axis. Dr. Mira Solon stood by the console, her face bathed in the blue light of the holographic display. Her hand hovered over the controls, trembling just enough to be noticeable. "I need you to look at this," Mira said. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet it seemed to echo off the metal walls. "Both of you, look." Seren Ilyeth sat up on the biobed. Her silver skin was pale, draining of its usual iridescence. Beside her, Ronan Ward stood like a sentinel, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the mattress. They looked. On the screen, the image of the cradle sac had been magnified by 400%. The amorphous glow that they had assumed was merely a cluster of regenerative tissue was gone. In its place, floating in the amniotic fluid of the sac, was a form. It was small, curled into the ancient universal shape of beginning. It had a spine, delicate as a string of pearls. It had a head slightly larger than a human's, with the faintest hint of the orethicranial ridges. It had limbs, 4 of them, that drifted lazily in the liquid. But it was the composition of the form that stopped Seren's breath in her throat. The fetus was not just flesh. It shimmered. Through the translucent skin, they could see a skeletal structure that did not look like calcium. It looked like spun glass. It caught the scan's light and refracted it, sending tiny prisms of color dancing through the fluid. And in the center of the chest, a small, rhythmic pulse of light beat in time with the audio monitor. Thump hum, thump hum. "It is dreaming," Mira whispered, pointing to the jagged lines of the neural readout at the bottom of the screen. "See those alpha waves? They are synchronized. It is processing. It is becoming." Seren stared at the screen. Her mind, usually so disciplined, so capable of categorizing biological data, simply stopped. "This is impossible," Seren said. The words felt clumsy in her mouth. "The genetic divergence between Orethi and humans is too great. Chromosome counts do not match. Protein synthesis is incompatible. It cannot be." "Under normal circumstances, you are right," Mira said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "But these were not normal circumstances. You introduced a third variable." "The glass fever," Ronan said. His voice was rough, sounding like gravel grinding together. "Exactly," Mira said, turning to face them. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were burning with scientific wonder. "The glass fever was not a disease, remember. It was a builder. It was an architectural program looking for materials. When you mixed your DNA with Ronan's and introduced the glass did not just become a vaccine. It became a bridge. Mira gestured to the glowing child on the screen. It took the Arethi structure, she explained, and the human adaptability, and it used its own silicate matrix to bind them together. It filled the gaps. It acted as the mortar between the bricks. She paused, a small, incredulous smile touching her lips. "Congratulations," Mira said softly. "You two just accidentally invented a new species while saving the world. That is very Havenwell of you." Seren slid off the biobed. Her legs felt like water. She did not look at Ronan. She could not. She walked out of the lab, the door hissing shut behind her. She needed air. She needed the cold, damp air of the cavern to remind her that she was still real. She walked until she reached the observation deck overlooking the mineral lake. The water was still, and black a mirror for the darkness inside her. Panic was rising in her chest, cold and sharp. A child. For 200 years, she had defined herself by what she was not. She was not a mother. She was not a tool. She was not a bearer. She had been exiled because she refused to bring a life into the world that was destined to be a weapon. She had looked at the empty incubator every night and told herself that emptiness was freedom. And now she carried a life that was half her, half the man she had grown to love, and half a planetary plague. "I did it again," she whispered to the darkness. "I let my body become a laboratory." The fear was suffocating. What if the child was a monster? What if the glass instinct took over? What if it grew up to be cold and hard, turning everything it touched to stone? Or worse, what if it was beautiful? What if she loved it and the universe tried to destroy it? "You are spiraling," a voice said. Seren did not turn. She knew the footsteps. She knew the scent of machine oil and soap. Ronan stood beside her at the railing. He did not touch her. He just stood there, a solid presence against the void. "I am not spiraling," Seren said, her voice tight. "I am calculating risk vectors. This entity inside me, it is unknown. It is dangerous. It has 10 fingers and 10 toes," Ronan said calmly. "I counted." "It has a skeleton made of silicate crystal," Seren snapped. "It is glowing, Ronan. It is not a baby. It is a biological experiment." "It is our kid," Ronan said. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Seren turned to him, her eyes wide with panic. "How can you say that so easily? You saw the screen. It is a hybrid. It is something that should not exist." "Lots of things shouldn't exist," Ronan said. He looked out at the lake. "I shouldn't exist. I should have died in that transport crash 5 years ago. You shouldn't exist. You should have been executed on Orith for treason. This station shouldn't exist. It's a hollow rock in the middle of nowhere." He turned to look at her, his expression fierce and tender. "We are all just accidents, Seren. Survivors. Why is this little one any different?" "Because I am afraid," Seren cried out. The confession tore out of her. "I am afraid that I will look at it and see a weapon. I am afraid that everyone else will look at it and see a monster. I am afraid that I cannot be a mother because I have spent 2 centuries training myself to be a wall." Ronan reached out then. He took her hands. His grip was strong, anchoring her. "Look at me," he commanded. She looked. She saw the lines around his eyes, the gray in his hair, the scars on his neck. She saw the history of a man who had lost everything and kept standing. "You are not a wall," Ronan said softly. "Walls don't weep when a patient dies. Walls don't hold the hand of a terrified mechanic while he is bleeding out his own gene sequence. You are the softest thing in this entire jagged mountain Serenilyath. You just pretend to be rock so nobody hurts you." He moved one hand to cover the spot on her abdomen where the light pulsed beneath her clothes. "And as for the world seeing a monster," Ronan's eyes hardened a flash of the soldier he used to be returning. "Let them try. I have a very large wrench and I am not afraid to use it." Seren let out a breath that was half sob, half laugh. Just then, the door to the deck opened. Dr. Mira Solon stepped out. She held a datapad in one hand and a mug of tea in the other. "I hate to interrupt the dramatic moment," Mira said, her tone dry but warm. "But I have been running simulations. The fetal development is accelerated. The erythema metabolism is fueling the growth. We are not looking at 9 months, Seren. We are looking at maybe 3. 3 months, Seren gasped. "Give or take a week," Mira said. She leaned against the doorframe. "So if you two are going to have an existential crisis, I suggest you schedule it for a Tuesday, because we have a nursery to build." Mira looked at Seren, her expression softening into something deeply maternal. "Seren," Mira said, "I know your history. I know what they did to you on Oreth. But this is not that. You are not a factory here. You are the architect. This little life is the answer to the question we didn't know how to ask. It is the peace treaty between the flesh and the glass." She raised her mug in a salute. "And, frankly," Mira added with a grin, "it is going to have the best immune system in the galaxy. The kid will probably be able to eat rocks for breakfast." Later that night, Seren returned to the neonatal unit. The room was quiet. The amber lights were dim. She walked to incubator 4. For the first time in 20 years, she did not pull out her cleaning cloth. She did not wipe the glass. Instead, she placed her hand on the cold surface of the machine. She closed her eyes and reached inward past the fear, past the memories of exile, down to the cradle sack. She felt the pulse. Thump hum. It was stronger now. It felt curious. She felt a tiny flutter against her uterine wall. A kick. Seren opened her eyes. She looked at the reflection in the glass. She saw herself. Not the exile. Not the nurse. Just a woman. Ronan entered the room. He had been following her at a respectful distance, making sure she was all right. He stopped at the doorway. "Seren," she turned. She looked at this man who had given his blood without hesitation. This man who had told her that freedom was a choice. She placed her hand on her abdomen, feeling the warmth of the life inside. "Ronan," she said softly. He stepped closer, entering the circle of amber light. Seren took a deep breath. She let the last of her resistance fall away, like the shards of glass from the patient's skin. 200 years, she whispered, her voice trembling, but gaining strength with every syllable. 200 years of weariness and loneliness. She looked him in the eyes, her gaze clear and defiant. "But I can bear your child." It was the same sentence she had said as a bitter joke months ago. But the tone had changed. It was no longer a complaint. It was a declaration. It was an offer. It was a promise. Ronan stood very still. The air in the room seemed to vibrate. He looked at her hand on her stomach. He looked at her face. His eyes grew shiny, shimmering with tears he refused to shed. He didn't ask, "Are you sure?" He didn't ask, "Is it safe?" He didn't ask, "What about the glass?" The veteran just smiled. It was a smile that cracked the mask of his grief wide open. It was the smile of a man who had been walking through a long tunnel, and finally saw the sun. "Yes," Ronan said. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of ozone and silver skin. Seren held him, feeling the shudder of his shoulders. "Yes," he whispered again into her skin. They stood there in the amber light holding each other and the impossible third life between them, while the station hummed its lullaby around them. The news traveled through Havenwell, not as a rumor, but as a revelation. Seren expected fear. She expected the whispers of monster and abomination. She prepared herself for the isolation. She was wrong. It started with Bram Kellen. 2 days after the discovery, the senior medical officer summoned the entire staff to the main lecture hall. Seren stood in the back, arms crossed over her stomach. Ronan beside her, with his hand on his weapon belt, a wrench, naturally. Bram stood at the podium. He activated the holographic projector. The image of the hybrid fetus floated in the air, glowing strange and undeniably beautiful. A murmur went through the room. "This," Bram announced, his voice booming, "is the next step." He looked around the room, challenging anyone to object. "For weeks we fought the glass fever," Bram continued. "We thought it was an enemy. We were wrong. It was a question. And thanks to Nurse Ilyath and Mr. Ward, we found the answer." He tapped a command on the console. A document appeared on the screen titled Clinical Protocol Integration and Adaptation of Silicate Biological Hybrids. "I am establishing a new research wing," Bram said. "Its purpose is not to eradicate the anomaly, but to understand it. This child," he paused, looking directly at Seren. "This child is a citizen of Havenwell, and we are going to write the book on how to care for them." He stepped down from the podium and walked over to Seren. He held out a data pad. "I need your notes, Seren," Bram said, his voice lowering to a respectful tone. "You are the primary specialist. I am just the scribe. Tell me what we need." Seren took the pad, stunned. "Are you not afraid?" "I am terrified," Bram admitted, with a grim smile. "But I have decided that being terrified is boring. Being a pioneer is much more interesting." The reaction from the patients was even more profound. The miners, the ones who had been encased in glass, felt a strange kinship with the unborn child. They called it the glass child, or the little prism. One afternoon, Silas, the old driller, cornered Ronan in the corridor. "So," Silas grunted, leaning on his cane. "The nurse is carrying the little one?" "She is," Ronan said, bracing himself. Silas nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rough stone. It was a raw diamond, unpolished but full of fire. "Found this in the deep core 10 years ago," Silas said, pressing it into Ronan's hand. "Kept it for luck. You give it to the kid. Tell him it's from Uncle Silas." "Uncle Silas?" Ronan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah," Silas challenged. "You got a problem with that. We all got a bit of glass in our blood now, son. That makes us kin. If anyone messes with that baby, they got to go through 50 angry miners with pickaxes. You understand?" Ronan closed his hand over the diamond. He smiled. "I understand. I'll make sure the kid knows." It wasn't just Silas. Gifts began to appear at the door of Seren's quarters. Hand-carved wooden toys, soft blankets woven from thermal insulation fibers, a mobile made of polished scrap metal that chimed like bells. The community of Havenwell, a collection of broken people hiding from the universe, had found a new center of gravity. They were no longer just patients and staff. They were a tribe protecting their own. The weeks flew by. The accelerated growth of the fetus meant that changes happened daily. Seren's body adapted with a wreathy grace. Her silver skin took on a deeper, more luminous hue. She felt strong. The cradle sac had fully integrated, acting as a secondary womb that filtered nutrients and reinforced the child's crystal structure. They held a dinner the night before the scheduled birth. It was not a baby shower. There were no pastel balloons. It was held in the mess hall, with tables pushed together to form one long, chaotic banquet. Dr. Solon sat at the head of the table, looking like a proud matriarch. Jayan, the young medtech, was trying to juggle synthetic apples, and failing miserably to the delight of the recovering patients. Seren sat in the middle, Ronan beside her. She looked around the room. She saw the scars on the walls, where the glass had once grown. She saw the scars on the people phantom limbs burn, marks the lingering stiffness in the miner's joints. But she also saw laughter. She saw Bram explaining the molecular structure of soup to a bored mechanic. She saw Silas telling a tall tale about a space worm to a group of nurses. "Hey," Ronan nudged her. "You okay?" Seren blinked back tears. I was just thinking. About what? About exile, she said. I thought I lost my home 200 years ago. I thought I would never have a family again. She looked at the ragtag group of misfits, outcasts, and survivors. I was wrong, she whispered. I just hadn't met them yet. Jayen stood up, tapping a spoon against a glass. Speech, someone shouted. Speech from the dad. Ronan stood up. He looked terrified. He looked at Seren, seeking support. She squeezed his hand under the table. Ronan started clearing his throat. I'm not good at speeches. You all know that. I'm better at fixing toilets. Laughter rippled through the room. But, Ronan continued, his voice steadying, I know something about structure. I know that a building is only as strong as its foundation. And for a long time I thought my foundation was broken. I thought I was just rubble waiting to be cleared away. He looked down at Seren, his eyes soft. Then I met a nurse who yelled at me for dropping a box, he said, smiling. And she taught me that you don't throw away broken things. You fix them. You make them stronger. He raised his glass. To Havenwell, Ronan said. To the cracks in the walls. And to the light that gets in. To the light, the room roared back. As the toast ended, Seren felt a strong, decided kick against her ribs. She laughed, placing her hand over the spot. The child was ready. The birth, when it came, was not a medical emergency. It was a ceremony. It happened in the neonatal unit, under the soft amber lights. Mira Solon presided, calm and efficient. Okay, Seren, Mira said softly. The sac is ready to separate. The interface is loose. One more push. Seren gripped Ronan's hand. She did not scream. She focused. She used her bearer training, the mental discipline she had once hated, to guide the life out of her body. Come out, she thought, projecting love and safety. Come out, little prism. The world is waiting. With a final fluid movement, the pressure released. I have him, Mira announced. A sound filled the room. It was not a cry. It was a hum. A high, clear, resonant note, like a finger run around the rim of a crystal glass. Mira quickly cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a thermal blanket. She turned her eyes, shining above her mask. He is perfect, Mira whispered. She handed the bundle to Seren. Seren looked down. The child was small, but heavy for his size. His skin was pale silver like hers, but it had a translucence to it. Under the skin, faint lines of blue light pulsed in a slow, rhythmic web, his nervous system reinforced by the glass. His eyes were closed, but the lids were shimmering. He was beautiful. He was stardust and geometry. Ronan leaned in, his breath hitching. He reached out a trembling finger. The baby's hand reached up. The tiny fingers, strong and cool to the touch, wrapped around Ronan's index finger. Hey there, Ronan whispered, tears streaming openly down his face. Hey there, buddy. I'm your dad. The baby opened his eyes. They were not Arethi eyes, nor human eyes. They were multifaceted like Seren's, but the irises were a deep, warm hazel, Ronan's color. He has your eyes, Seren said, laughing through her tears. And your chin, Ronan noted. Definitely your stubborn chin. Does he have a name? Mira asked softly from the foot of the bed. Seren looked at Ronan. They had argued for weeks. Ronan wanted something sturdy. Seren wanted something lyrical. We decided, Ronan said. Elen, Seren said. It means bridge in High Arethi. And Ward, Ronan added. Elian Ward. Elian, Mira tested the name. It suits him. The final scene of the story did not take place in a grand hall or a spaceship bridge. It took place in the quiet of the neonatal unit 3 days later. Seren was sitting in the rocking chair beside Incubator 4. The incubator was no longer empty. It was humming softly, maintaining a perfect temperature for Elen, who was sleeping inside. The glass of the machine glowed with the soft blue light of the child's own bioluminescence. Ronan was standing on a ladder nearby, fixing a light panel in the ceiling that had been flickering. "You know," Ronan said, tightening a screw. "I was thinking. The kid is going to need a bigger room eventually. My quarters are too small. Yours are too damp." "Are you proposing we renovate?" Seren asked, watching the baby sleep. "I'm proposing we knock down the wall between our units," Ronan said. "Make a suite. Jayan says he can help me with the wiring." "Jayan will electrocute himself," Seren said. "I'll supervise," Ronan promised. He climbed down the ladder and wiped his hands on a rag. He walked over to Seren and sat on the arm of her chair. He looked at the baby, then at her. He rested his hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," Seren said. And she meant it. The weariness was gone. The loneliness was a distant memory. "He is going to have a strange life, Ronan," she said quietly. "Half alien, half human, born of a plague." "He'll be fine," Ronan said. "He's got the whole station watching his back. And he's got us." Seren leaned her head against Ronan's arm. 200 years, she murmured. "I thought my story was over. I thought it was just the epilogue." "Nope," Ronan said, kissing the top of her head. "You were just the prologue. Chapter 1 starts now." The camera of the mind pulls back. It moves away from the intimate warmth of the nursery, through the amber-lit corridors of Havenwell. It passes the mess hall where miners and medics are eating together. It passes the therapy garden where Alara is playing with a set of wooden blocks, building a tower that does not fall. It moves out through the airlocks, through the heavy blast doors now welded open. It rises above the surface of the moon Calvir. The moon is dark, a jagged rock floating in the cold silence of space. But in the center of a massive mountain range deep within a hollowed-out crater, there is a light. It is not the harsh glare of a reactor. It is a soft, pulsating blue-white glow. It shines through the vents and the crystal veins of the mountain. It looks like a heartbeat. Inside that light, an exiled Orethi nurse, a broken human veteran, and a child made of glass and stardust are sleeping. They are a family forged in fire, the beginning of something new in a weary universe. The stars above are cold and distant, but down in the rock, the heart of Havenwell beats on. Strong, steady, and very, very alive. The end.